The gentle dawn light filtered through the ancient trees lining the narrow street in the city of Riverbend, where the story of Judge Ava Thompson began. Ava, a 42-year-old black woman, was known for her unwavering fairness and relentless determination against injustice. From a young age, she grew up in a community where the voices of black people were often ignored, and justice seemed like a distant dream. Every morning, Ava stepped into the courtroom with a passionate heart, carrying the responsibility not only as a judge, but also as a protector of the rights of the marginalized. Riverbend was not just her workplace, but also her home, where she deeply felt that racial discrimination still permeated every hidden corner of society. The city's atmosphere often simmered with debates about justice and discrimination, but Ava knew that real change started with concrete actions and courageous decisions in the courtroom. She stood there as a living symbol of hope, change, and fairness. Ava's footsteps echoed on the courthouse steps, a reminder of the responsibilities and challenges she was about to face. Her eyes held determination, knowing the journey ahead would be full of hardships. This is the story of a woman fighting not just for herself, but for millions who long for a fairer world. Before we explore this story together, please leave a comment telling us when and where you are listening. How did this story reach you, and how many more do you think it will touch? Now, without further delay, let's begin. The bright yellow glow of streetlights on Franklin Street highlighted the cold face of Officer Mark Caldwell. At 36, Caldwell had served in the Riverbend Police Department for over a decade, but his name was known not for bravery or heroic deeds. Instead, Caldwell was infamous for controversial incidents, accusations of abuse of power, racial discrimination, and disrespect toward the black community. More importantly, despite numerous complaints and evidence, Caldwell was shielded by his colleagues in the system with subtle protection. Temporary suspensions and internal investigations quickly faded into silence. A vicious cycle of injustice and secrecy prevailed. One night in a closed police meeting, Caldwell spoke with Sergeant Hayes, the unit's leader. "You don't have to worry about that, Mark. I've talked to leadership. Don't let those accusations affect your work." Caldwell nodded, a cynical smile briefly crossing his lips. "Thanks, Sergeant. I know I have allies." This cover-up not only made Caldwell feel above the law, but also empowered him to continue acting unchecked, without control or punishment. Caldwell's story is a stark example of the darkness within the system, where law enforcement officers can abuse power without timely consequences. It reflects a grim reality, deep inequality and prejudice, entrenched in the mechanism, leaving victims of abuse abandoned, while offenders are shielded by the cloak of authority. Once at a press conference, Caldwell responded defiantly to reporters, "I'm just doing what's necessary to maintain order. If anyone is unhappy, that's not my problem." Those words were a declaration of war against justice and equality, deeply wounding many in the community. However, in this story, Caldwell was not just an individual, but a symbol of a system that needed change. He represented the barriers that people like Judge Ava faced every day in their fight for justice. Sociological analysis shows cases like Caldwell's are not rare, and systemic cover-ups only deepen the pain and injustice in society. Therefore, Ava's story is not just a legal case, but a struggle demanding fundamental changes in the culture and structure of the police force. In Ava's heart, Caldwell's story was motivation to stay committed to her mission, knowing that confronting him and the system was no easy challenge. Evening descended, bringing a heavy atmosphere over the Riverside neighborhood. A scream pierced the air, making everyone around stop and look toward a dark alley. It was the night when injustice and violence became stark realities in Riverbend's story. Malik Johnson, a 16-year-old boy, stood there with unarmed hands, eyes wide but not resisting. The young man was merely trying to explain when Officer Mark Caldwell suddenly closed in using excessive force. The first punch knocked Malik down. The painful thud of a young body hitting the cold concrete echoed sharply. "Stop!" a witness shouted, voice filled with panic and outrage. However, Caldwell did not stop. The punches and kicks continued, not only injuring Malik physically, but also extinguishing his young hopes and dreams. Witnesses could hardly believe the brutal scene unfolding before their eyes, a defenseless teenager being treated like a dangerous criminal. Malik whispered, I didn't do anything wrong." But his words were drowned in chaos and Caldwell's cold contempt. Another officer tried to intervene, but Caldwell brushed him off with a disdainful look. Soon after, news of the incident quickly spread throughout the Riverbend community. Community meetings were organized where people expressed outrage and sorrow. "We cannot let this continue to happen," a mother tearfully said. At the courthouse, Judge Ava Thompson received reports of the case. She knew this was not just an ordinary case, but a symbol of the fight against violence and racial discrimination within the police force. In her office, Ava spoke with her legal assistant. "We must do everything possible to ensure this case is fairly tried, not just for Malik, but for the millions silenced by abuse of power." Meanwhile, the police tried to downplay the incident, calling it an unfortunate accident and restricting information from leaking out. Sociological analysis showed Malik's case was not isolated. It reflected the deep-rooted reality of violence targeting communities of color and internal cover-ups that made justice difficult to achieve. Malik later received medical care, but his wounds were not only on the surface. Fear, psychological trauma, and a sense of injustice would follow him for life. Malik's story became a wake-up call for Riverbend society that the fight for justice and change was no longer optional, but imperative. The cold morning light at the Riverbend courthouse could not ease the tension within Judge Ava Thompson as she reviewed the case files on Officer Mark Caldwell and teenager Malik Johnson. Thick stacks of documents on her desk reflected the light detailing every incident, testimony, and videos capturing the violence. Ava sighed and looked out the window at the awakening city. Yet inside her was a world full of pressure and responsibility. She understood that not only one life awaited justice, but a whole community, people of color, yearning for real change. In her office, she spoke to her legal assistant, Lisa. "This is not just a case. It's the voice of the oppressed, an opportunity for us to affirm justice." Lisa nodded with determination. "We will do everything to protect the truth, ma'am." But Ava knew the path ahead would not be easy. Facing a powerful police force, especially when the defendant was an officer shielded by many colleagues, demanded steadfastness and subtle strategy. A closed meeting was held with lawyers and court representatives. Ava emphasized, "We cannot allow this case to be covered up. It must be open, transparent, and fair. Justice is not only for Malik, but for all who are oppressed." Those words were not only a declaration of responsibility, but also a promise to herself and the community. Outside, public opinion surged, and the media continuously reported the incident, creating pressure, but also an opportunity for Ava and her legal team to harness social support. At a community meeting, Ava said, "I don't promise it will be easy, but I promise I won't give up. We will fight for truth and justice." Awareness of the challenges ahead drove her to continually deepen her legal knowledge, develop strategies, and prepare for what could be a long and arduous trial. Every step Ava took reflected her faith in justice, a faith she hoped would inspire the community and create a turning point in Riverbend's history. The courtroom door creaked open, softly signaling the start of an important trial in Riverbend City. Inside, cold white light reflected on Judge Ava Thompson's stern face. She sat there ready to face a daunting challenge few dared to confront, directly opposing Officer Mark Caldwell. When Caldwell entered the courtroom, arrogance radiated from his every gesture. He did not look the judge in the eye, instead casting a cold, contemptuous gaze over the entire courtroom. Caldwell was well aware that his power stemmed not only from his badge, but also from the system's protection. As the trial began, Ava opened with a serious tone. "Mr. Caldwell, I expect you to cooperate and respect the court's procedures throughout this trial." Caldwell responded with a contemptuous tone, "I'm just doing my job. Your Honor, I have no obligation to prove anything to people who don't understand the circumstances." His words struck hard against the fairness and seriousness of the trial. Ava clearly sensed the challenge, but remained composed. She replied, "Here, everyone is equal before the law. Your job is no excuse to violate human rights." Caldwell smirked, his eyes scanning the gallery before locking back on Ava. "We are here to maintain order, not to explain or ask for permission." The atmosphere in the courtroom suddenly grew tense. Some in the audience held their breath, feeling the rising tension between two representatives of opposing forces. The confrontation continued with sharp words as Ava methodically questioned Caldwell about the recorded acts of violence. Caldwell tried to deny or downplay responsibility, but Ava's gaze never wavered. She had fought for justice from the depths of her heart, and now each of her questions landed like a critical blow, making it impossible for Caldwell to maintain his stance. Once again, Ava emphasized, "You are free to defend yourself, but you cannot use your power to abuse others." Caldwell replied with a dismissive air, I'm not afraid to confront, but don't expect me to bow to baseless accusations. The trial became a crucible of emotions and unyielding confrontation. Ava knew this was only the beginning of a long battle, but she also believed that with steadfastness and integrity, justice would prevail. Every word, every glance carried the weight of history, pain, and hope. The story of Riverbend, of Ava and Caldwell was a struggle not just personal, but symbolic of a society yearning for change. The atmosphere in this courtroom grew heavier as teenager Malik Johnson stepped up to testify. The stage light illuminated the face of the 16-year-old boy, youthful, but with eyes full of determination and pain. Malik began his story with a trembling but sincere voice. That day I was just walking home after playing basketball with my friends. I had no weapon, I did nothing wrong. Sighs echoed through the courtroom, some quietly wiping away tears. Malik continued recounting the terrifying moments when Officer Caldwell suddenly attacked. He pushed me to the ground and then started hitting me. I couldn't do anything, only endure and plead. The honest, simple testimony carried the heavy weight of injustice, making the courtroom feel suffocating. Next, the first witness, Linda Carter, a neighbor who witnessed the entire incident, spoke firmly. I clearly saw Malik wasn't aggressive, but Officer Caldwell used excessive force. I felt very scared for the boy. Linda's testimony struck a blow to Caldwell's honor, rendering the officer silent. Yet he still tried to maintain a facade of calm. Another witness, David Kim, a nearby shop owner, shared, "Over the years, I've witnessed many abuses of power by the police, and this time was the worst." The courtroom tension intensified as witnesses stood one by one, sharing similar stories of abuse and racial discrimination within the police force. Judge Ava looked at each witness with gratitude and determination. "Thank you all for your courage in speaking out. Your truths are the strong foundation for justice." Caldwell reacted with a scowl, occasionally interrupting with baseless denials, but no one paid attention to his words. Each testimony was not only a personal accusation, but a collective voice from the community, a call for change and fairness within the system. Tears and choked sobs echoed in the courtroom, allowing everyone to deeply feel the anger and sorrow of the victims. The trial reached its climax as Judge Ava Thompson continued to question Officer Mark Caldwell about the abuses he committed. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, every word and glance intensely observed. Caldwell, increasingly defiant, refused to admit guilt. He stood raising his voice provocatively. "Your Honor, you are exceeding your authority. I am not a criminal to be judged this way." As the trial began, Ava spoke with a cold but firm voice. "You stand before justice, and you must be held accountable for your actions, whether as an officer or a citizen." In a sudden burst of tension, Caldwell stepped forward and his punch flying through the air, striking Ava's face. The impact echoed throughout the courtroom. Everyone froze, some shouted, some stumbled, back in their seats, while Ava staggered but stood firm. Blood began to drip from her lip, yet her eyes remained filled with unyielding determination. A lawyer stood up shouting, "Police, stop this immediately." Security rushed in to restrain Caldwell as witnesses panicked and worried. The courtroom descended into chaos, but it was also the moment justice was truly tested. Despite the pain, Ava held her spirit steady. She looked directly at Caldwell, her voice strong. "I will not let this violence silence the voice of justice." Caldwell's punch was not merely a personal act, but a symbol of abuse of power, disregard for the law, and contempt for human values. This story was not just a legal case, but a battle for fairness and human rights embodied by Ava's courageous actions and the community's outrage. After Caldwell's shocking punch, the courtroom plunged into turmoil. Screams and the hurried footsteps of security filled the space. Yet amidst the noise, Judge Ava Thompson stood tall, blood trickling from her lip, pain etched on her face, becoming a symbol of unshakable resilience. Ava took a deep breath, her eyes blazing with determination and inner strength as she spoke clearly and convincingly. "I am not a victim. I am the face of justice here, and I will not let this act undermine my mission." Security officers gently helped her sit down, while witnesses and lawyers whispered about the recent events. No one dared turn away from Ava now, for they all felt the presence of a power transcending violence. In those moments, Ava was more than a judge. She represented millions fighting against injustice, abuse, and racism. Physical pain could not break her. Rather, it ignited her resolve more fiercely than ever. Ava continued, "Justice cannot be crushed by violence or threats. It is the guiding light of this society, and I will keep that light burning." The courtroom gradually quieted, all his eyes filled with admiration and respect. Ava's response inspired the community, giving them hope that no matter the difficulties, truth and justice would prevail. A nearby lawyer whispered to a colleague, "She is not just a judge, she is a symbol, a strong woman in the fight against injustice." Ava's strength stemmed not only from legal knowledge or authority, but from an indomitable spirit and profound belief in justice. She was the pillar many in the community relied on for hope and trust. Amid challenges, Ava stood firm, painting a vivid picture of strength and courage, showing everyone that change cannot be stopped by violence or pressure. Immediately after the shocking event in the Riverbend courtroom, the story of Judge Ava Thompson and Officer Caldwell's violent acts spread rapidly across all social media platforms. The internet exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForAva and #Stand with Justice, attracting millions of shares, comments, and support from across the United States. A video capturing the moment Caldwell punched Judge Ava circulated at lightning speed, fueling public outrage. Comments poured in overwhelmingly condemning the violence and calling for fundamental changes in the police system. Civil rights organizations such as NAACP and Black Lives Matter quickly released statements supporting Ava in organized marches and protests demanding justice and transparency. In a live television interview, social activist Jasmine Brooks stated, "Ava's story is a wake-up call for the entire society. Abuse of power and racial discrimination in the police force are not isolated incidents. We must stand together to demand justice and human rights." However, not everyone agreed. A segment of the public and police supporters reacted negatively, accusing Ava of provocation and questioning her honesty. Some social media comments were filled with hatred and discrimination, even including threats directed at Ava and her family. The local newspaper Riverbend Gazette also published contrasting opinions in an analytical article. The story is not simply about an act of individual violence, but reflects deep-rooted conflicts in modern society. Nevertheless, the power of social media exerted significant pressure on the authorities. Internal investigations were promptly launched, and city officials publicly committed to transparency and serious handling of the case. Media analysts noted that in the digital age, the power of online communities is a double-edged sword. It can expose the truth, but also spread misinformation if uncontrolled. Therefore, the role of mainstream media and social activists is crucial in maintaining fairness and truth. At a social justice forum Ava shared, "I know there will be many challenges ahead, but the support of the community and your voices give me the strength to keep going." Ava's story became more than a case. It ignited a flame of inspiration, prompting people to think and act toward a fairer society. In the shadows of Riverbend's courthouse quarters, Mia Turner, a young court clerk, silently observed and recorded every detail of the case. Mia was not just a paperwork handler. She was the keeper of truth, shrouded by the mists of power and cover-ups. When news of the courtroom violence spread, Mia sensed unrest within the court. Surveillance footage mysteriously disappeared, sparking suspicions of interference intended to obscure the truth. Unable to stand aside, Mia decided to act. She quietly backed up unedited videos, collected hidden documents, and secretly preserved evidence. Each step was risky. If discovered, she faced severe consequences. One late evening, Mia spoke over the phone with her close friend, an investigative journalist named Emily. "Things are more tightly controlled than I expected, but I managed to save important evidence. I believe this can change the course of the case." Emily replied with determination, "We will do everything to ensure the truth is revealed. Stay cautious and safe." Mia's courage was not only in collecting evidence, but in her faith in justice and change. She understood that though just one individual, every contribution could make a profound difference. The evidence Mia gathered was passed to the press and social activists, sparking a wave of protest and calls for strict prosecution of the case. At an internal meeting, a senior official tried to reassure those involved, "We will handle this matter seriously. Nothing will be hidden." Yet everyone knew Mia's bravery was the first light in the darkness, proof that the truth could never be buried forever. Her story became a symbol for those daring to stand against injustice, even when facing danger and isolation. In the days following the revelation, Riverbend Courthouse became the center of heated debates and growing pressure from multiple sides. Beneath the calm surface, powerful forces began covert maneuvers to control the narrative and protect their interests. The police union representing thousands of officers in the city quickly voiced support for Caldwell. The union president, Robert Gaines, a man with a strong voice in the sector, declared at a press conference, "We support officers carrying out their duties and will not allow anyone to use this incident to damage the reputation of the police force." He emphasized that Caldwell was a dedicated officer and that all accusations must be carefully examined before conclusions are drawn. This was a strategic effort to minimize negative impacts on the force's image and to obscure the case from public view. Meanwhile, some local government officials also sought to prevent the case from becoming a trigger for widespread anti-police movements. They held private meetings to discuss ways to reduce media and public attention. A local legislator whispered to an aide, "We need to control the situation to avoid this case destabilizing society or affecting the upcoming election." These efforts included delaying investigative steps, limiting media access to information, and pressuring court staff and witnesses to remain silent. Even within the court, pressure was significant. Some of Judge Ava's colleagues whispered that she was going too far, that her determination might fracture the relationship between the court and the police force. However, Ava remained steadfast, knowing that change must start with personal courage. Mia Turner, the brave court clerk, clearly felt the scrutinizing glances and silent warnings from those who wished to keep quiet. She thought to herself, "Doing what is right is sometimes not easy, but fear must not control us." In-depth analysis of internal and political pressures reveals a complex picture where power and vested interests overshadow truth and justice. These are challenges not to be underestimated by those striving for transparency and systemic change. Opposing forces not only slowed the legal process, but also caused the community to feel disappointed and lose faith in the judicial and police systems. Yet amid these difficulties, the determination of Ava Mia and the community only grew stronger, igniting a flame of hope for justice. The dim light of the Riverbend courthouse office cast shadows on Judge Ava Thompson's tired face. She sat quietly by her desk, her eyes gazing out the window where the city was gradually sinking into the darkness of evening. The noisy events of the day, the trial, the shouts, and the violent punch still echoed in her mind like relentless waves crashing on the shore. Ava felt each wound on her body was not only physical pain, but a profound mark of mental injury. Her thoughts and emotions intertwined in anger, sorrow, loneliness, but also resilience and great responsibility. She understood she was not just an ordinary person, but a symbol of justice and hope for the oppressed. In a silent moment, Ava whispered to herself, "I must be strong. Not just for myself, but for all those who cannot speak." She recalled encouragement from family, friends, and the community. Yet sometimes as night fell, loneliness and pressure weighed heavily. She knew the road ahead was long and full of challenges, and every decision she made could affect many lives. A phone conversation with her mother helped her stay strong. "Mom always believes in you, Ava. Justice is not always easy, but you are the one who carries the light in the darkness." Those words were like medicine, giving her strength to balance heavy responsibility and deep pain. Ava never forgot she was also a woman who sometimes felt weak, but chose to stand up, chose to fight for what is right. She resolved, no matter how painful, no matter surrounded by pressure and opposition, "I will not back down. This is my mission." That thought was not just a vow, but a blazing fire in Ava's soul, lighting her path on the journey of justice, despite all hardships and suffering. The Decisive trial in Riverbend took place in a tense and suspenseful atmosphere. The courtroom was packed from legal professionals to community members, all eagerly awaiting a fair outcome after long days of waiting. Judge Ava Thompson entered the courtroom with calm but resolute demeanor. She knew this trial not only determined the fate of Officer Mark Caldwell, but also symbolized the fight against abuse of power and racial discrimination within the police system. The trial began with the presentation of video footage capturing Caldwell's violent acts. The vivid and authentic images sent chills through the room, sighs and she's echoed throughout the courtroom. The prosecutor's attorney stood up, voice firm. The evidence clearly shows the defendant's unlawful and excessive use of force against the unarmed teenager Malik Johnson. This behavior not only violates human rights, but also undermines community trust in the police force. On the defense side, Caldwell's lawyer tried to offer mitigating arguments. Officer Caldwell was operating under high-pressure conditions, and his actions were aimed solely at maintaining order. The tug-of-war between both sides made the trial even more gripping. Witness testimonies, including those of Malik and Linda Carter, the eyewitness, were presented as solid evidence. Judge Ava relentlessly posed sharp questions, refusing to let excuses overshadow the truth. Officer Caldwell, can you explain why your actions exceeded the limits and caused serious harm to an unarmed teenager? Caldwell tried to maintain a calm expression, but his voice carried tension. I only acted based on my instincts and experience. The trial continued with many discussions and confrontations, making everyone feel the weight of justice being carefully considered step by step. Legal experts, psychologists, and sociologists were also invited to clarify the broader impacts of the case on the community. Outside the courtroom, the event was broadcast live, attracting great attention from the community and civil rights organizations. Public pressure increased, forcing the system to be transparent and seriously handle the case. Finally, after days of arguments, Judge Ava delivered a message. Justice is not an easy goal to achieve, but it is always the most necessary to maintain peace and fairness in society. The trial was not only a judgment on Caldwell, but also a declaration for those fighting for truth, for a future free from abuse of power and racial discrimination. The dimming light of evening fell over Riverbend, but debates over police reform showed no signs of easing. The ideological battle between reform advocates and conservative forces grew more intense than ever. Shortly after the sensational trial, the police union led by Robert Gaines held a press conference defending the officers, especially Caldwell. He spoke firmly. We do not accept hasty judgments and condemnations. Police work under tremendous daily pressure to protect the community. All reforms must be based on understanding and cooperation, not one-sided condemnation. This statement sparked waves of opposition from social activists and communities of color who called for fundamental changes to end violence and abuse of power. At a public speech, activist Jasmine Brooks emphasized, "We cannot continue to allow a small group to abuse power unchecked by the system. Reform is necessary to protect everyone's rights, especially the vulnerable." The ideological clash between defenders of the status quo and reform supporters deepened. Debates on forums, social media, and legislative chambers became battlegrounds for opposing arguments, from the use of body cameras to multicultural training and complaint handling against police. At a city council meeting, Councilwoman Emily Sanchez stated, "We must prioritize community interests, build a transparent, accountable police force that respects human rights. Change can no longer be delayed." However, the police union responded with strong lobbying, calling for support from politicians and conservative communities. Fierce political dialogue between factions caused reform progress to face many difficulties and delays. Under public pressure, some policies requiring surveillance cameras and multicultural training were passed, but implementation and oversight remain long and complicated issues. Riverbend's community continued organizing workshops and dialogues to raise awareness and promote public participation in the reform process. They understood that only consensus and continuous community oversight could bring sustainable systemic change. Ava Thompson, standing amid the reform whirlwind, kept her faith. "This fight is not for the faint-hearted. We must persevere, struggle tirelessly so that justice is not just empty words." The story of police reform in Riverbend became a vivid example of the difficult battle among power interests and the desire for fairness, a battle in which every individual can contribute their strength. Under the soft light of dusk in Riverbend's Central Square, Judge Ava Thompson stood before a large crowd of citizens, social activists, and community leaders. A gentle breeze carried the noisy voices full of hope and vitality from an awakening community. Ava looked at each face, seeing untold stories, ongoing pains, but also the burning desire for justice and change. She was no longer just a judge, but had become a symbol of faith and resilience. "We stand here not just to witness change, but to become the agents of change." Her voice rose gentle but powerful. "Justice is not a gift bestowed. It is the right of each of us, and we must stand up to protect it." Applause echoed everywhere, creating an atmosphere of joy and unity. Ava continued, "We have witnessed challenges, violence, and injustice. But that is also when we show the strength of perseverance and courage. Each of us can be a voice for justice. Don't stay silent, don't stand aside." A middle-aged man in the crowd spoke up, "Ava, you have inspired us. We will not let this story end here." Ava smiled, her eyes shining with fierce belief. "We are not alone. The power of the community is an unquenchable flame. Keep speaking out, keep acting for a fairer future for all." She skillfully reminded everyone to subscribe to the community media channel to spread stories like this so no one is forgotten and the truth is always protected. Her closing words echoed hauntingly, "Silence today is complicity tomorrow." That message was not only a warning, but a powerful call urging every heart and will to rise against injustice for each person to become a changer of the world. Under the warm sunset of Riverbend, Judge Ava Thompson stood before the crowd, her eyes glowing with faith and determination. She invited everyone not only to listen to her story, but also to become part of the fight for justice and equality. Thank you all for listening. I've said softly but with strength. If you believe in truth and justice, please hit subscribe so together we can spread the voice so no one is left behind. She paused, her gaze sweeping over every face, then ended with words that silenced the room. Lingering deeply in the mind of each listener, silence today is complicity tomorrow. The resonance of those words was like a wake-up bell urging everyone to stand up, speak out, and act for a world where injustice and violence have no place.